had times of discouragement. All of us have faced various trials and tribulations. Many of you here either are going through some now or have done so in the past. We understand how that presses on a person, how it stresses us out. I think a great example of that is found back in the Old Testament. We're going to be turning to 1 Kings, the 17th chapter. And notice there the things that developed in Israel, things kind of began to fall apart. About 50 years after the dividing of the northern and southern kingdom, a king came on the throne with the name of Omri. He was a very wicked king. He brought in pagan worship. And when he was gone, his son Ahab ascended the throne. And Ahab was like his father in many ways, but on top of all his wickedness, he went and married Jezebel. And that was a sore problem for Israel for some time. You see, Jezebel was a worshiper of Baal. Baal worship had been common in Canaan before Israel had moved there from their deliverance. But Israel had avoided much of Baal worship. But when Jezebel came, she urged Ahab to provide for 450 priests of Baal. And they gathered around her table and they were benefited and comforted by her. God became very distraught, of course, with the situation. And he called upon Elijah, to go and to tell Ahab that there was going to be a cessation of rain. Probably the reason for the stoppage of rain had to do with Baal worship. You see, Baal was worshipped as a god of fertility, and Baal supposedly controlled the seasons and the weather. And so Israel was going to be tested by God as he cut off the fountains of water. In chapter 17 and verse 1, Elijah the Tishbite, who was of the inhabitants of Gilead, said to Ahab, "As the Lord God of Israel lives, before whom I stand, there shall not be dew nor rain these years, but according to my word." Now, if you turn to James chapter 5, James will tell us that it was 3 years and a half that it ceased to rain in Israel. Now, we've all experienced periods of drought, but 3 years and a half, things were in terrible condition. People literally starved for lack of rain. And so God prepared for Elijah a brook, and he was told to go there, and the Lord would provide for him water and food. Elijah also went to a widow and provided her food miraculously as she gave comfort to him. But we find that God finally ceased the rain, the stoppage of rain, and it rained again in Israel. When Ahab met with Elijah, he said, "Are you he who troubles Israel?" And Elijah said, "What me? It was you who brought the drought." Elijah didn't really have anything to do with it. He was just commanded of God to announce it. And so Ahab became very angry at Elijah. Elijah finally, in order to challenge the prophets of Baal and Jezebel, he called for a meeting and asked that they all meet together at Mount Carmel. This is recorded in the 18th chapter. And Elijah said to the people, "We will have a contest. The prophets of Baal on this hand, and I, the prophet of God, on this hand. You cry out to your God and attempt to bring fire down upon your sacrifice. I will do the same. We will see whose God will answer." And of course it came to pass that Elijah was the only one who could bring the fire down to burn the sacrifice. As a matter of fact, Elijah even ordered that water be poured on it before fire came down and consumed even the water. And so Elijah challenged the people and said, "Why do you halt between two opinions? Don't you see that Jehovah is stronger?" Because of that, the Israelites killed the prophets of Baal. Well, that really infuriated Jezebel. And that's why in the 19th chapter, in the text that was read this morning, Jezebel sent a message to Elijah, verse 2, and said, "May I die also if you aren't one of the dead by tomorrow." So that was a wanted poster out for Elijah. Jezebel is going to kill you. Well, when Elijah saw this, he arose and ran for his life. And it's interesting. Several times in Elijah's life, he would flee in order to avoid being killed. He was up against some really nasty opponents. But verse 4 says, "He went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a juniper tree, and he requested for himself that he might die." There's a strange thing about suicidal thoughts. Oftentimes they come upon people at odd times. Elijah has fled for his life, that is, to keep from being killed. And yet when he comes to rest, he begins to think, "I wish I was dead." Now, a clear-thinking person would probably have just stayed and let Jezebel do it. But Elijah came up with this on his own. He desired to die. Things were overwhelming him. Things were bigger than he could handle. At least he thought so. And for this reason, he sat down under a juniper tree. Well, we read in various history books that the juniper tree was called a broom tree. And it especially lived near water and in valleys. But it was a tree of vast amount of foliage and limbs that made a wonderful shade. And so it was a perfect tree for sitting under in the shade. This is why Elijah sat down under the juniper tree. But what do you do when life is out to destroy you? What do you do when the pressure is on? What do you do when stress has become overwhelming? Well, a lesson for us today is from the pages of God's Word. Verse 6, "And he looked, and behold, there was a cake baked on the coals, and a cruse of water at his head. And he ate and drank and lay down again." Verse 7, "And the angel of the Lord came again the second time and touched him and said, Arise and eat, because the journey is too great for thee. And he rose and did eat and drink, and went in the strength of that meat 40 days and 40 nights unto Horeb, the Mount of God." God called him on a journey while he was depressed and distressed. God called him to go on a 40-day trip. And to prepare him for that, God provided food and sustenance. You know, we read in the New Testament where Paul says in Philippians 4 and verse 13, "My God shall supply all your needs through Jesus Christ." Peter tells us that God cares for us, that we can always trust in God. When Elijah needed food, there was food. When he needed water, there was water. When he needed rest, there was rest. There was a shade when he needed a shade. And so the wonderful thing about life is we have a God who cares for us. That even though things may be difficult and distressful and pressing upon us on every side, we can rely upon the providence of God to care for his people. But we notice the things that God did with Elijah. And I think these are significant. The first thing that God did was to talk to Elijah in a cave. And verse 9, he came unto a cave and he lived there. And behold, the word of the Lord came to him, and he said to him, What doest thou here, Elijah? And he said, I've been very jealous for the Lord God of hosts. For the children of Israel have forsaken thy covenant, thrown down thine altars, and slain the prophets with the sword. And I, even I only, am left, and they seek my life to take it away. I think that one of the most stressful and difficult things that we will ever face in life is to feel like we are alone. No one else has been here. This is something I'm having to deal with alone. because he'd been running from Jezebel and from Ahab, and nobody else had been with him. No one else had taken a stand. But notice that that was true only as he understood it. In his mind, he was alone. Notice what God says to him. In verse 14, I only am left, and they seek my life to take it. And the Lord said, Go return on thy way to the wilderness of Damascus, and when thou comest, anoint Hazael to be king over Syria. And Elisha went. God reminded him that there were others as well. Other work to be done. And in verse 18, God even mentions, I have left 7,000 in Israel, all which have not bowed the knee to Baal, and every mouth which hath not kissed him. And so God knew more than Elijah did. Elijah looked out and he said, I'm all by myself. Well, if you read back in chapter 18, hundreds of God's prophets had been slaughtered by Jezebel. Those prophets were standing up for God also. But Elijah didn't consider that. As far as he was concerned, his tunnel vision was such that he was the only one who was facing this dilemma. Well, that wasn't true. We need a bigger perspective. We need to understand that our world is not really limited just to our work. We are a part of a vast group of people, even God's people. 700 who had not bowed the knee to Baal. Well, all those 700 probably were in danger because of Ahab and Jezebel. But Elijah didn't know that. And so we are not alone. Another thing that God did was to communicate with Elijah. You know, when things are out of hand, when things are difficult, we need someone to talk to who can understand how we feel and what we're going through. And at times in life, when we feel alone and we feel like this is happening just to us, it's hard to find somebody that we can freely communicate with. Sometimes they're there, and sometimes we struggle to find them. But if we'll look out in the world, we can find people, usually, who have similar situations. But we always have God. We always have the ability to speak with God. And this is an important thing. God allows us to communicate with Him. In 2 Corinthians chapter 12, the Apostle Paul says to the Corinthian church, after he had been through the trial of the thorn in the flesh, and God had told him he can't remove it, but His grace was sufficient to Paul. 2 Corinthians 12 and verse 10, notice Paul says, I take therefore pleasure in infirmities, in reproaches, in necessities, in persecutions, in distresses for Christ's sake, for when I am weak, then am I strong. That's a strange perspective, isn't it? That somehow when we're the weakest, somehow when we are the most stressed out, we are at that moment the strongest. I guess it's somewhat like, you don't know your own strength until you have to use it. I had an aunt and uncle who were in a home down the road from where we live, and their house caught fire. And they were inside and had a hard time getting out. But my aunt picked up a refrigerator and took it into the front yard and set it down. Now, we don't know why in the world she picked up a refrigerator. She loved to eat, that was true. Can you imagine a woman picking up a refrigerator and taking it to the front yard? Well, the doctor said, when adrenaline flows, you can do all kinds of things. Isn't it amazing how strong we can be? How much we can accomplish when we have to? Paul felt that way. He felt that somehow in moments of weakness, in moments of trial, in moments of infirmities, he bucked up to it. He met the challenge. He found strength in those moments. But God provides us with help. Jesus said in Luke 18 and verse 1, "Pray and faint not." When we feel we're about to faint, it's time to pray. Pray because God will help. God will strengthen us. He will allow us to find extra power, extra strength. In James, the 5th chapter, James was talking even about Elijah here. And notice that he said Elijah was a man of like passions, like as we are. Yet he prayed that it might not rain, and it didn't rain. And then he prayed again that it would rain again, and God provided that. And then James says, "The prayer of faith shall avail much. The effectual, fervent prayer of a righteous man shall avail much." We really don't know all the things that prayer will provide, but we know that it avails much. It has power. It changes things. Jesus taught that, and Jesus practiced that. And that's why in passages such as the book of Romans in the 12th chapter, the Apostle Paul is going to urge us as Christians, in particular, that we pray. In the 12th chapter, verse 12, he says, "Rejoicing in hope, patient in tribulation, continuing instant in prayer." Continuing instant in prayer. In other words, Paul is saying that prayer should always be handy to us. It should be available to us. Later in the 1 Thessalonian letter, he's going to say, "Pray without ceasing." Well, we all know that's technically impossible. You can't pray and never stop. But if prayer is always at hand, if it's something we can always pull into our experience, something we can always bring to our mind, then we have that power that's always available to us. And therefore, receive strength from God, lest we faint. And prayer also accomplishes another thing. Talking with God sometimes gives us insight. In James chapter 1 and verse 5, James says, "If any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of God, that giveth liberally to all men, and he will answer. It shall be given him." James 1 and verse 5. But ask in faith, realizing that God truly hears us. All of us could use another dose of wisdom. Wisdom is insight into all the issues of life. Insight into life and death and eternity and everyday living. It's one thing to know things, but it's another thing to have insight into how those things work. We all can use wisdom. But you see, with prayer, we gain wisdom. It's interesting that as God spoke to Elijah, told him things, shared information with him, Elijah stops asking to die. He gets over that. We must be able to get our mind on something else other than the present distress, the present situation. And the way we do that is by talking to God. By talking to God and by searching for other situations similar to ours, so that we can better understand what's happening, what's going on. Well, in the third place, God urged Elijah to do something for other people. I don't know how many times I've read in psychology books and various literature that whenever things are going bad for you, one of the greatest remedies someone else that you can help, befriend, or bring comfort to. And I don't really know why that works that way, but you find it throughout the Bible. Always we are urged to be on the lookout to do good for someone else. If you turn with me in your Bibles to the book of Galatians, we'll see an interesting statement that's made by Paul here in the 6th chapter, beginning about verse 8. Notice that Paul writes in Galatians 6:8, "For he that soweth to his flesh shall the flesh reap corruption, but he that soweth to the Spirit shall the Spirit reap life everlasting." That's interesting, isn't it? We can do whatever we can for the flesh. We can do whatever we can for the here and now. But if we can keep in mind, it's more important to do the spiritual thing, to get ready for eternal life. You see, that gives an understanding to the things that are occurring in life. And then verse 9 he says, "Let us not be weary in well-doing." Now Paul knows from his own experience that that's possible to happen. You know, you get tired of pulling the wagon. You get tired of dealing with the things. You get very stressed out over the difficulties that seem to go on and on and on. And sometimes when it rains, it pours, literally, on us. We begin to feel overwhelmed. And so Paul says that we should be careful to always think of the things that will pull us out. Don't be weary in well-doing, for in due season we shall reap if we faint not. There is a silver lining to every cloud. You may not be able to see it, and it may not even be in this life, but there is a silver lining to every cloud. And God tells us that. And he says, don't you give up, basically. Don't be weary in well-doing, for you will reap if you faint not. Now notice verse 10, it follows right after this. This is amazing to me. How are we going to not faint? How are we going to not weary out? As we have, therefore, opportunity, let us do good unto all, especially to them who are the household of faith. Over the years I've lived, I've known several who practiced a kind of distress ministry. And what I mean by that is someone who's going through very difficult times, very harsh circumstances, and they somehow find a way to be an encouragement to others. Let me give you two examples of that. There was a little lady in a nursing home back in Jacksonville, Florida. And she was very feeble. She had a lot of health issues. Could hardly get around. But members of the church would often go visit her. And without exception, they all go away saying, "Boy, she makes me happy. She gave me a great day." And I was a young guy at the time, and I thought, how is that possible? That doesn't encourage me. That doesn't build me up to visit somebody in a nursing home somewhere. So I began to visit with her. And they were right. They were right. She can lift you up. I don't care how far you stoop. She can lift you up. It's amazing, isn't it? Because she somehow saw another life. She saw another world. Not just this one where she was really self-contained. She was able to look beyond at a different place. Another lady I'll never forget, her name was Zoni. But because of the childhood illness, she'd lain unable to move in bed for 30 years. Now you think about that. Laying in bed and you can't move for 30 years. Her brother was her primary caregiver. This lady lived in Culpeper, Arkansas. But Zoni would use the telephone. And she'd call up members of the church and she'd talk with them and find out what was going on and say, "Oh, that was great, that was wonderful, I'm so proud of you." And just brighten people's day. And you go to visit her, and she'd have a mirror. She could move this right arm. So she would hold a mirror so she could lay in bed and talk to you and see your face. I've never known a lady like her. But she was kind and gentle, a dedicated Christian. She talked to people about the Lord. She talked to people about the church. And she would brighten your day. I'd go away from that place and I'd think, man, I've got so many things to be thankful for. Because I'm not like Tony. But you know, I got a feeling Tony's going to enjoy eternity one day. She's going to have a lot better life. Maybe better than many people here now. She found something more important in life. And so I think about that when I think about Elijah. What he needed to know was that he wasn't alone. What he needed to know is that God hears prayer. God was going to be with him. He was going to provide for him whatever was needed to finish his mission. But then, God gave him work to do. Notice, when Elijah begins to complain that I'm the only one doing anything, in 1 Kings 19 and verse 15, God says, now I've got a job for you. I want you to go and anoint Hazael to be king over Syria. And Jehu, the son of Nimshi, shall thou anoint to be king over Israel. And by the way, you need a replacement when you die, and his name is Elisha, and I want you to go and anoint him as the next prophet. What's God telling him? I'm not done with you yet. You don't need to die. You've got work to do. Isn't that a wonderful thing to know you're needed, to know you're important, to know you're a part of the future? And one of the things that we need to be aware of is the fact that God has something for all of us to do, no matter what our circumstance or what our situation. But Elijah got up from there, and he went off, and he did exactly what the Lord told him to do. And as far as we know, he never has to die again. But you remember how he did leave this earth. In a fiery chariot. He didn't even have to die. The Lord came and took him away. One of the great characters of the Bible. And I was reading as I was studying my lesson that even today in the Jewish Passover, when they observe the Passover, there is a cup of grape juice that's set off to the side. And the Jews say, that is for Elijah. That's for Elijah. And they do that because it was prophesied that Elijah would come and be the forerunner for the Messiah. And for that reason, the Jews held him in great regard. And even today, there is a cup for Elijah. Well, this morning, life may not be as difficult for us as it was for Elijah. He had to run most of his life from somebody trying to kill him. That would be difficult. That would be hard. But we know from the life of Elijah that God is with us. If we're doing what God asks us to do in our lives, He will not forsake us nor leave us. He will always be there for us to talk to Him and get strength from Him. He will always provide for us the knowledge that we are not alone. There are others about us who are also dealing with similar things. And finally, there's always something else for us to do, no matter who we are. If you're here this morning and not a child of God, do you have those kind of hopes in your life, those kind of promises that He will give? What do people do who have no faith in God? What do people do who have no faith and confidence in Jesus Christ, the Savior of man? I really don't know. But I know that God in Christ has given us much to live for, and even more to die for, because of His promises to us. If you're here this morning and need to become a child of God, hear the words of Jesus. He that believeth and is baptized shall be saved, Mark 16:16. Read the book of Acts and see how those people reacted to the preaching of Peter They repented of their sins and they turned to Christ as the Messiah. And they were buried with him in baptism and came forth to live a new life, a life of hope and promise, and a promise of eternal life to come. We can have that also as together we stand.